The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henrik Bick with the communications team here at the Music Business Association. I want to thank you all for tuning in today for our webinar presentation with the team at Chartmetric. We're going to be going through their 6MO report for the second half of 2020, including some brand new exclusive insights specifically geared for this report, including the Trigger Cities concept. Just want to start off today before I intro the Chartmetric team with a couple little housekeeping notes. You may have seen if you had attended Nylon last week or if you've been on our website, but we are extremely excited to debut a brand new member benefit called the Music Biz Mental Health Fund. We're extremely grateful to the SCARS Foundation and Music Health Alliance for their partnership in bringing this to life. If you're a Music Biz member that has been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in any way, you are eligible to apply for mental health services, assistance accessing them, whether it be a screening or a therapy session. Really excited to offer this as a way to give back to our community and help those who are in need. And if you're looking for any more information on that, it's right on the homepage of our website. That's musicbiz.org. While you're there, you'll also find some information on our latest events. Our next event coming up is Next Gen U, the second edition of our student-focused seminar series. It'll be taking place February 23rd to the 25th, featuring over 40 speakers from around different areas of the industry who are looking to, who have already made a name for themselves and who will be sharing their expertise on how students can make a name for themselves as well. We're excited to have for the opening keynote the two co-founders of CrowdSurf on February 23rd, and plenty more student-focused programming to help them make their way through the industry. So be sure to visit our website, musicbiz.org again, for information on that and for registration links. And finally, for more announcements like this, for all of the latest programming that we have coming up throughout the year, be it our Music Biz live interview series, future webinars, all things like that. Be sure to follow us on social media, Music Biz Assoc on all platforms, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. That's Music Biz Assoc. So enough from me. I'm going to pass the mic over to Jason Hoven from the Chartmetric team. He's going to intro everybody who's presenting today. If you have any questions, we're going to be answering them at the end of the session and potentially a couple questions as relevant through the presentation. Be sure to drop them in the question box on your GoToWebinar dashboard. So I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute. Be sure to interact with us, the presenters. And I want to say thank you to the Chartmetric team. And Jason, go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Henrik. And thanks, Nicole, for inviting us here today. And thanks, everybody, for showing up. I know it's still in the middle of the week for a lot of people, and I'm sure at the beginning of February, everyone's really busy. So thanks for your time. So my name's Jason. I am manager of content and insights here at Chartmetric. I've got a few of my teammates here with me today. We've got Rucker on the line as well. We're just doing audio only here, so you can look at our beautiful mugs right here. Rucker is our digital strategy lead. He'll be talking a little bit later, and then also our business intelligence analyst Michelle will come on the line, and as well as Shashank, who's our data analyst. So all in all, like, our job is to basically make data be really useful for everyone in the music industry or music industry adjacent. So whether you're an artist yourself, you're at a label, a manager, or if you're in a creative branding agency working on an advertising campaign, or hopefully one day when we're past distributing vaccines, back into the live business, our job is to basically use data and computers to make business decisions easier for you. That is us. If you're not familiar with us as a company, we started in 2016, where a lot of us are based in Silicon Valley. My team is and everyone on this call is based here in New York City. But we also got folks in the UK and Korea as well. We're computer engineers, we're music business folks, data scientists. It's a rather small team, we're less than 20 people. And if you're familiar with other platforms who are kind of in this music analytics space, maybe you've come across Next Big Sound in the past. They are now acquired by SiriusXM and Pandora. But other, current players in the industry, which include SongStats or Vibrate or SoundCharts, all great tools, all with our own really great different nuances. I would say ours is we really try to use data science to kind of create a next level experience when it comes to data. So, we provide a market level kind of insight when it comes to different data sources, but also try to make a cross-platform performance, which is, for example, an overall ranking of our 2.7 million artists that we collect. We also try to use neighboring artists, so you can kind of discover other artists who are kind of maybe have a similar amount of TikTok followers as you, but are also still in the same genre that you might want to collaborate with or maybe learn from a competitive standpoint. We even do stuff like playlist journey, where we can take a track and ever since it gets released, look at all the different playlists it's kind of like been through in its kind of life here in the streaming world, and look at the different relationships between playlists, via these tracks journeys. So those are kind of a few of the reasons we kind of try to separate ourselves out from the pack. But whether you're an artist or a digital marketing team or kind of doing general analysis on geography or audience demographics, this is kind of the level of insight we try to provide. I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Shashank, though, to talk a little bit about our data sources.
Thanks, Jason. So I'm Shashank. I'm the analyst at Chartmetric. So getting into the data we have at Chartmetric, it can be broadly divided into two parts. One's coming from the streaming data, and the second one is the social data. So social, as we all know, it's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, Wikipedia, Bands and Down, Twitch, so on and so forth. And the streaming data we have is from all the music platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Deezer, SoundCloud, Pandora. We recently had data from Pandora, Genius, and Shazam. We track mostly around 2.7 million artists. We have around 21 million tracks data repository. Since we started in 2016, our data collection has been from that point of time, and we have been adding so on and so forth. So in 2017, we got SoundCloud. In 2018, we got Genius playlist, and so on. And in streaming and services playlist, we've been tracking data since 2016 as well. And as we go ahead in time, 2018, we added Apple Music and Deezer in our playlist. As from a charts perspective, most of our data has been started from the year 2017. So how many playlists do we track? We have around 1.5 million playlists in our database, which we track across 4 or 5 platforms, which are Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, Amazon, YouTube. And this data is spread across a lot of cities. So for example, if I talk about Spotify, the data we collect is for around 9,000 cities. And for YouTube, it's around 3,200 cities. So that's about data we collect on, we have on our application. Now handing it over to Rutger, he'll dive into the 6 MOs.
Thanks, Shashank. So as Jason mentioned, we're all part of the Chartmetric content and insights team. So what that means is we essentially are responsible for interpreting and distilling all of the Chartmetric data that comes through our platform in novel ways and communicating our discoveries through different, forms of content, whether that's our podcast or our blog, which is called How Music Charts, our YouTube channel, our social media channels, but also our interactions with actual Chartmetric users, music industry professionals, and independent artists as well. So together we try to contextualize the vast swaths of music and social data that are out there. So past projects have included like a 3-part study on the effects of COVID-19 on music consumption and fan engagement. We also do like a monthly Black Lives Matter series, which shines a light on Black artists through the lens of music data. And of course, our biannual 6MO report, which focuses more on overall global music industry trends in 6-month chunks. So For this particular report, we looked at July 1st to December 31st of 2020. And every year, this is our 4th edition, but every edition, we focus on the same sort of 6-month chunk. So the first half of the year and the second half of the year. And in every report, we start by highlighting artists and tracks who experienced the most growth on music and social media platforms within that last 6-month period. And in this latest report, we did the same, breaking down the top 10 growers on 5 music platforms, 4 social platforms, and our own overall popularity score, which is something we call cross-platform performance, which essentially takes 8 or 9 different music and social media sources and puts them all together and gives artists an overall popularity score against each other. So it's a ranking system. So, number 1, whether that's Justin Bieber or Ariana Grande for the day, to 2.7 million, essentially. So we do this for all the artists that are in our database, and it's refreshed every day. So it gives you an idea of how an artist is doing essentially overall on their digital platforms. So what's different about this report? Typically, we will sort of, after we get through that top 10 sort of most growth section, we hone in on some particular stories or particular angles, whether it's comparing playlists by platform or looking at music syncs on Netflix or something of that nature. For this report, we sort of doubled down on a concept that our Chief Commercial Officer, Chaz Jenkins, actually sort of pioneered, called trigger cities. And essentially, the concept is that there are cities around the world that trigger, quote unquote, favorable algorithmic effects on music streaming platforms and can ultimately help artists grow their audience worldwide. So that's something so we focused the second half of our report all on that, both in terms of like what a trigger city is, what today's trigger cities are, and how artists might be able to sort of leverage this knowledge and apply it to their own digital marketing strategies. And without further ado, I want to let Michelle take you through the breakthrough music section, so part 1 of the 6MO report.
Thanks, Rucker. So yeah, I'm just gonna dive straight into it because there are a lot of platforms that we're tracking. So for Spotify, I'm just gonna go over key highlights for each platform as well. I know there's a lot to go into with the artists because we do top 10 and then right about the top 3, but just in the interest of time. So for Spotify, the focus for the second half of 2020 was really on hip hop and R&B, particularly in the US, possibly thanks to COVID limiting global movement and increasing domestic music consumption. And Spotify, arguably, as we write under the trend, is one of the go-to digital streaming platforms for American listeners. But it's also, which when I get to these platforms later, we can see that hip hop and R&B is just dominating a lot of platforms. It's also quite prominent on Pandora, and Southeast Asia has a lot of movement with Shazamming rap and hip hop tracks too. So whether that's like just an increasing interest internationally or just also a lot of paying attention to what's going on in the US as a major music market, there is a crossover there. And if we can flip to YouTube, these artists all had huge growth, possibly also thanks to COVID, as a lot of fans are turning to video streaming to supplement the loss of live music as well. What's interesting about YouTube this time around particularly is that Germany, a few German artists really are highlighted in this edition. I think that there's a crossover there with, if any of you were at the Nylon Connect last week, they also talked about how Germany is really making moves with its own market domestically. So yeah, here there's like Two Colors and Zoe Vase. But that's a big difference from before, because generally YouTube has a very international spread. But since German artists are really taking a forefront in this edition of 6MO, could be something to look out for as the year goes on as well. And the other point of YouTube, of course, is how global it is, the different parts of the world it reaches. There's more competition, I suppose, for eyeballs and ears, but for example, Hoa Lam, which you can see on the graph here, had pretty huge growth in Vietnamese. So yeah, there's a lot of spread there. And then the Pandora graph next. Probably not that surprising that favorite genres are very US focused. So again, with hip hop and rap, and then country and pop. But if we look at stream counts, several of the tracks with the highest stream counts were boosted by TikTok, probably also unsurprising. But yeah, Pandora does have a lot of these tracks on Pandora have a lot of crossover with TikTok as well. So in general, Pandora is a very good gauge for what's going on domestically in the US. If we move to Shazam, as everyone knows, it's a popular music discovery tool, and specifically we focus on Latin America and Southeast Asia this time, specifically because of trigger cities. More on that later. And Shazam in Latin America seems to be a pretty good gauge for listening preferences. So rock is still very popular in Latin America. K-pop is also is on the rise. There are 2 tracks here that are big K-pop tracks, and TikTok, again, unsurprisingly, also helps boost some of these tracks on Shazam in Latin America. But speaking of TikTok, definitely like monopolized the Shazams in Southeast Asia. So Shazam in Southeast Asia looks like it really pays attention to the latest social trends of what's occurring, and it's no surprise that that's TikTok again. And then if we move to, oops, sorry, I went a bit fast, but if we can move to TV syncs. So usually when tracks have high sync counts, like Dream State and Cinnamon, it's actually because the track is main title sequence of the TV show, or it's in the end credits, so it repeats throughout the series. So what's interesting here is that a lot of these tracks were on HBO shows, and they're either specially commissioned by HBO as covers of originals, or they're reworked or scored specifically for the for the TV soundtrack. So yeah, HBO has been making a lot of movement with their TV syncs in terms of music. If we can move to social platforms below. Thank you. So I've said it like probably 3, 4, 5 times already, but TikTok again. Unsurprisingly, there is huge growth potential on TikTok, even though it had a rocky year politically, but kind of came out stronger than ever by the end of 2020. It's, dances and challenges are still a major driver for tracks and artists, racking up millions of streams. And what we noticed here as well is that international artists are starting to penetrate the American TikTok market more effectively. So that could be growing international interest. It may also have been because the situation with TikTok was a bit unstable in the US, and so that allowed for TikTokers to pick up globally as well. But yeah, then if we can move to Instagram. Instagram looks like it's just an increasingly personal platform for artists to interact more closely with their really dedicated and their loyal fans. The top 3 here were really able to boost their followings by communicating on a very intimate level with their fans. And then, unsurprisingly, again, probably that Instagram had a lot of TikTok crossover, possibly because the platforms in terms of like features and the visuals are very similar, but that was the trend for Instagram. For Twitter, it's the social media platform for spotlighting political issues. There's also a lot of growing engagement in social issues from younger generations worldwide. So this time, the major trend for Twitter was that a lot of the artists who gained a lot of growth were from Nigeria, and it was around the time of the End SARS movement that reignited in Nigeria. And then again, a close second is TikTok. You can see Dixie D'Amelio is #1 on Twitter for growth. She also popped up for YouTube. Whether it will continue, we'll have to see though, because I think, for example, for her Twitter is deactivated now, also because the flip side of Twitter is that a lot of there is potential for artists to, or just for celebrities to not feel so good, get a lot of hate on Twitter. So yeah, 2 sides of the same coin. And then if we could flip to Wikipedia, Wikipedia is pretty steady in terms of the trend that we usually see each report. It's all about milestones and significant events or news in an artist or celebrity's life. So unfortunately, death is the main driver, and Naya Rivera is a bit of a sad example of that in the second half of last year. But the other interesting point for these top 10, at least, is that Netflix is also making waves. There are 3 artists on here: Aidan Gallagher, Philippa Sue, and then A.B. Quintanilla, who were all on a Netflix show in one form or another in the last year. And so there's a lot of interest in that as well. So just as an overall, international artists in particular are starting to penetrate on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok much more effectively than in 2019. Again, that could be because of actual growing interest in international music, which has been a trend in the past few years. Could also have been boosted by the fact that the US has been largely closed off due to COVID. But either way, socials are increasingly key for artists to really build their followings. And as more people get online, there's greater potential for fan base. So why not reach out? And now I'm going to pass it over to Shashank to go over our CPP of overall popularity.
Thanks, Michelle. So we have this in we can say it's a metric with CPP, cross-platform performance. So what it does essentially is it tracks how well an artist is doing across different platforms. So the different platforms I'm talking about, there are 8 specific platforms. These are Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, Deezer, SoundCloud, Instagram, Facebook, Wikipedia, and Twitter. It's a combination of the social and streaming platforms I had talked about earlier. So what it does is it's basically essentially divided into 2 parts. It's stage and followers. That's how its CPP is calculated. Stage, it's a measure of how an artist reach is, how a user who views, listens, or consumes an artist music every time it contributes to that stage variable. So if artist, for example, is doing very well on Spotify and Apple Music, he's gaining a lot of popularity, traction over there. He's developing his stage, and that's how you can better your CPP ranking. The second part of it is how well he's doing on his followers count. So on his social or streaming media, the number of followers that are the traction he's gaining across these platforms. That adds to his it's basically the total fan base he has. So when a user follows, likes, or subscribes to an artist, the user is easier for that artist to connect with it in the future. So essentially, the artist having lower CPV ranks just don't get playlisted a lot. They also manage to turn the listeners into fans. That's what essentially CPP brings on to one key metric across all these different platforms. So this metric is continuously improved and the model is worked upon continuously. And now we have a trend over here, which we see, which Michelle will go over.
Yeah, thanks, Shashank. So like Shashank just mentioned, there are a number of factors that can influence CPP. But as I mentioned from the Breakthrough Social section just now, that developing an artist's social media in addition to or like alongside streaming is really key now. And the thing about CPP is that it might look very different if TikTok were included, because the previous streaming and social media platforms were heavily influenced by TikTok last year. But with the CPP that we have right now, it shows that these artists are really growing steadily on perhaps a more sustainable way on all of these platforms, because also the difficulty with TikTok is once you gain that momentum, how do you capture it and transfer it to really grow a more long-term following. So these artists here really made use of what they had, whether it's YouTube or collaborations or just constant releases throughout the year to really grow their fan base. Yeah, and I'll pass it back to Shashank for the prediction section next.
Thanks, Michelle. So this time in the 6MO, we added this predictive section just to analyze how an artist was doing and how is he going to do in the next 6 months. And we're trying to see if that artist actually breaks through. In simple language, it's basically we're trying to see how his growth was over the last 6 months. And we're trying to predict what and how who's going to break through in the next 6 months. So we are aware of that. It's in simplistic, in technical terms, it's called simple linear regression. That line just goes from that. You can see the growth from of an artist in the last 6 months, and that's how we're trying to predict, keeping all other things constant and keeping the growth rate same. We see that the artist, how well they are doing in the next 6 months. So keep an eye out on the next 6MO if we see these artists in there. And Michelle, you want to take over?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, like Shashank mentioned, it'd be cool to keep an eye out in the next 6MO and see if these artists pop up again. Obviously, this is our kind of first stab at prediction, so it may not be perfect yet, but I would recommend downloading the spreadsheet, which is below the top 3 content here. Yeah, you can download the list of artists that we pulled that are poised to break through in 2021. I will say that the spreadsheet may be more geared towards Eastern European, like Russian artists, because it does appear that things may have been affected, since we are looking mostly at only at Spotify here for this prediction, that the prediction was affected by Spotify's launch at the start of the second half of 2020. But what made these 3 artists that we have here stand out was really their reach across the world, the growing kind of international or at least cross-regional fan base that they have, and also the boost that they got, specifically Jaro and Kanza and Claire Rosencrantz, the boost that they got from Trigger Cities, which is a nice segue to Jason and Rucker's part on the second half of 6MO.
Cool, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Shashank. So yeah, we'll move on to the second half of this report, which is about trigger cities. If you haven't heard about this concept before, it's something we wrote about in 2019 that seemed to resonate with a lot of people. So we decided to kind of take another look at it in this episode and see if we can get into more detail on it and maybe look at it from an Irish perspective. So if you haven't read about it, it's this idea that obviously streaming is a global thing, but when it comes to the way we think about when we put music out into the world, it's really going everywhere. So there are cities that haven't been the traditional hubs, Berlin, London, New York, LA, Chicago, that have high consumption rates on one hand, and also can be very cheap to advertise in. So there's like kind of two pieces to kind of what may make up like a trigger city. And when you put those two things together, when you have like very dense cities like Jakarta or Quezon City in the Philippines or Lima, Peru, or Sao Paulo, Brazil, Mexico City, of course, it was like Spotify's mecca for streaming, on their own blog. You have these like very dense, very voracious, music streaming cities that can potentially change the way your music kind of circulates in the digital world, because a follow is a follow, a listen isn't a listen, and from a tech perspective, which we're not a DSP, of course, but we can at least understand algorithms and how they may work. Those numbers like all mean something. They can mean that you could be triggered into like another like release radar on Spotify, or be put on one of the top charts on Apple Music, or Deezer, YouTube playlists, what have you. So this idea that it's, on one rosy view, it's like just trying to emphasize a global mindset when it comes to thinking about your music and how it circulates in the world. In a more pragmatic way, it's the arbitrage of attention. It may cost a lot in one place, but maybe it doesn't cost so much to get attention to your music in other places. But at the same time, it's still the same systems, the same algorithms, and the same DSPs, and they can kind of trigger things later on down the road for you. One good example of this that we wrote about back in 2019 was Love. A very independent artist who is an American and kind of came of age in his career in New York, but really started to see his first big resonance in Southeast Asia. So his team got wind of it. That brand of kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, but just very kind of hard on your sleeve, kind of pseudo electronic pop that Love's made such a big name for himself on. It just resonates really well in that region, and it just started hitting all like these playlists there, and that's kind of like where he started his road to, I think it's like 1 billion streams plus at this point. So just an illustration of kind of like how these cities that may have not been traditionally looked at in at least the Western music industry as kind of places with which to really think about in an active way when it comes to rolling out a new release is what this trigger cities concept is. So when we took a look at it in this report, we tried to understand, okay, we kind of understood it from a very general point of view, but really, if we get down to kind of brass tacks, what are the numbers that can go into it? What are the different features that would make up MOM? And we just really thought of two. One is the high amount of consumption, and the second is the lower ad cost, which Rucker's going to get into in a minute. But for this first part, you could even divide this into kind of like two other parts, so deep and broad music stream consumption. So what we mean by that is, I think, well illustrated by this chart we put together here. So what you're looking at is a chart of basically across our 2.7 million artists that we collect on in Chartmetric. This is kind of like an unfiltered kind of YouTube views on all those different artists from like this one like 28-day period at the end of last year. And so as you can see, when we look at kind of average views per artists, but looking by city, not by artist, not by track or video or anything like that, we kind of pivot around the data a little bit, if you will, to look at what cities are getting the most average views per artist across our entire kind of artist platform. As you can see, it's a very striking regional focus on South Asia. So a lot of big cities like Agra, Lucknow, and Patna in India, two Pakistani cities, all have huge views. So this is over 1 million average views per artist at the top, going all the way down to 331 here in, I think it's northern India, if I'm right about that, Shashank. So this is average views per artist. Now, one thing that we kind of noticed when we looked at the data was if we looked at the number of artists within all of those average numbers, it starts to tell a more nuanced story. So while obviously if you're, for example, an Indian playback singer, which is very well established singers who sing in a lot of movies there and are kind of very highly regarded, if you talk about super fans, like these are artists that are out YouTube viewing Drake and Taylor Swift and some of the biggest names of the West. So it's something that we noticed here, that even though you have high average views per artist, when you look at how diverse the artists that they're listening to are, it's actually quite low. So now in some of the bigger cities like Delhi, you can see that these counts are higher, but a few thousand for a city is actually not quite high, especially for such a global platform like YouTube. So kind of one of our takeaways here is, when it comes to YouTube, one of the most kind of like, most available streaming platforms available to most people. It says something about kind of like a depth of consumption here. But now if you compare it to a filtered list where I think what was the number? It was if we filtered by, 15,000 unique artists. So basically the same list, but filtered by having at least 15,000 unique artists within like those average YouTube views per city, or per artist per city in the city. You see much higher numbers. So Mexico City, which I mentioned before, at least Spotify had mentioned it's such a streaming mecca for them. Almost 80,000 different artists in just 1 month period made up all those views that we're tracking on Chartmetric. And you have other cities in Latin America and Southeast Asia, like Lima, Bogota, Santiago, Jakarta, Bangkok. We did have a couple that are outside those areas, I think. Yeah, Istanbul was one, and Seoul, which is more kind of Far East Asia as opposed to southeastern. Really, you see such a marked difference between kind of the region of the cities where these are available and the type of cities that are here. So as you can see, when we filter it a little bit, you start to see, maybe these are cities that, depending on the type of music that you're representing, might fare well better here, because it starts to lean towards, I guess, a type of willingness to experiment, if you will. And basically, if we scroll down a little bit further down here, we did the same thing with Spotify monthly listeners. We don't have stream counts on Spotify outright, but kind of one proxy that we use is monthly listeners. So this is the amount of unique listeners for a particular artist in the past kind of rolling 28 days. And so kind of the same thing kind of shakes out here. Obviously, YouTube is more available in different countries because it's been around so much longer than Spotify, although Spotify is in a lot of these countries. Still mostly kind of South Asian focused, but you can start to see some other cities popping out like Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro. But as you can see, the unique artists, as you can see, pop up again for the same cities that we were talking about before. So these are kind of the trigger cities that we're starting to kind of focus down on from a data perspective. Again, Mexico City, Jakarta, Sao Paulo, Santiago. These are the cities which again are kind of cross-platform, showing a willingness to listen to a diverse set of artists. Obviously, this should be relevant to whatever your particular music is. If you happen to be from an area or have a type of music that really resonates in the area, you can probably throw a lot of this stuff out the window. But kind of from a more, if you're representing, dozens, hundreds of artists potentially, from a strategic point of view, this is something to really consider in terms of the way you kind of focus ad spend, what have you. And again, when we filtered this it was about 20,000 unique artists. You can see the trigger cities kind of starting to pop out more. Now, obviously with Spotify, you have kind of a more kind of Western leaning, Western Europe leaning user base, because this is according to like the quarterly earnings that Spotify puts out. Usually it's in the high 50s to 60% monthly active users in those two regions, North America and Europe. So it's going to reflect a little bit on the kind of cities that we pull out here. But even then, you can still see a lot of the same Latin American and Southeast Asian cities. So all in all, just trying to show a bit of a regional bias in terms of kind of cities that are willing to experiment with different types of artists. But there's kind of a second piece to this as well, because it's not just about trying to understand where you might have a good chance of marketing your music with a high consumption rate, but there's kind of a second piece which talks about ad spend a little bit, and I'll have Rucker go ahead and talk about that a little bit.
Thanks, Jason. So yeah, as Jason mentioned, the first sort of feature we looked at for these trigger cities was that high consumption. And the second feature, which I'm going to talk a little bit about now, is potentially lower digital advertising and digital marketing costs. So with any marketing campaign, at least paid marketing campaign, you want to choose the most efficient and cost-effective strategy and increase your return on investment for that campaign. In other words, you want to get the most bang for your buck. So just like some cities have populations with bigger appetites for music consumption, and especially digital music consumption, some are also more likely to engage with digital advertising and are thus potentially less expensive to target. And it's not necessarily because of socioeconomic conditions, but a lot of this has to do with cultural and consumer behavior, or how much demand there is for new digital music discovery and music consumption through digital means. So one way to measure demand and advertising efficiency, at least on if you're doing, like Instagram ads or Google search, what have you, one way is cost per click, or CPC. So essentially how much each click on your ad is costing you. So if ad 1 is being served in location 1 with the same budget that ad 1 is being served in location 2, but you're getting more clicks on ad 1 in location 2, then your CPC is lower in location 2, if that makes sense. So essentially, the lower your CPC, to put in very simple terms, the lower your CPC, the better. And how this applies to trigger cities is that not only are they potentially massive streaming consumption hubs, but they're also, you can also advertise to more of these cities for less money than traditional music industry hubs like Berlin, London, or New York. So we did a little experiment here, and to do this, we were using Google's keyword planner. So you can essentially project future cost for advertising on Google with this tool using certain keywords. And what we found was that Berlin, London, and New York tended to have higher CPC, or cost per click, than, so those are the cities in white on this graph here, than the trigger cities, which are represented in green here. So you can see that advertising, at least for these particular keywords, in Berlin is almost $1 per click, which is really expensive. Whereas, even in Bangkok, it's like half that price. But one thing I want to sort of drive home with this point is that we're really not suggesting that, you just advertise in a cheaper place to get more streams or something like that. It's really about finding where your audience is and understanding what will resonate in certain locales. It's not about sort of trying to game the system. It's just about sort of breaking down traditional barriers that have been there and have, for the most part, just focused on these usually Western hubs, like New York City and Los Angeles and what have you. So if we can scroll down, Jason, to, this next graph. So you can see here that if we aggregate the above data, the white is sum, the green is average. So it costs more to market or to advertise to these international music industry hubs than it does to just 7 trigger cities. So you can market to more trigger cities for less money than to traditional industry hubs. And I think we can scroll down again. So we've taken that same data and juxtaposed it with some of the consumption data. And so if you were, as I was speaking to before, if you were looking just to maximize ROI, then theoretically on Spotify, you would probably look to Sao Paulo, where CPC is lowest compared to the massive consumption numbers that are there. Granted, this is just a subset of the data, so just of these cities, that would be the case. Whereas you can see in Berlin, consumption is a lot lower, but again, the CPC is a lot higher. So it's more expensive and you're not likely to reach as many people. If we toggle over to YouTube, it's a little bit of a different story. So here, theoretically Mumbai would be the ideal city to target, but as Jason mentioned, with deep consumption versus broad consumption, Mumbai is likely more of a deep consumption market, which means it's likely a smaller artist pool. So it's going to be harder to penetrate that market as an outsider. So it might not be the best, even though it looks good on paper, it might not be the best option for you, which goes back to my point that it's important to always take cultural considerations into account and not just look at data. This is just a very sort of small part of the puzzle to help you get there. And to that point, listeners aren't just data points. So ultimately, you're wanting to connect meaningfully with an audience and not just get clicks for cheap. So we can't stress that enough as well. And we'd be remiss not to mention TikTok as well, which is the next section. So right now, TikTok is still, relatively new. And as a result, it's still very much track focused as opposed to artist focused. So artists, they're starting to pick up on how to market themselves as artists on the platform, but it hasn't gained traction in the same way that Instagram has. It's much more unpredictable, much more track focused. So this is going to be, so just take that into account when looking at this data, because artists haven't sort of embraced it fully as an artist marketing platform yet. And another thing to consider here is that our data for TikTok is grouped by country. So this is looking at trigger city countries, and we could probably safely assume that trigger cities are probably some of the larger countries or cities in these countries. But just keep that in mind, that it's not necessarily a one-to-one thing. So what we've done is we've essentially aggregated TikTok followers of artists that we have in our database, and our data is a little skewed toward the US. So also take that caveat into mind. So that first white bar is the number of non-unique TikTok followers that are from the US who are following artist profiles on TikTok, essentially. But you can see the next 3 countries are quote unquote trigger city countries. So Brazil, what was the second one? Indonesia? Brazil, India, and Mexico, where we know that major trigger cities are. And you can see, if you toggle to the next tab, Jason, sort of zoom in on these trigger cities. So like Brazil has 300, or accounts for around 300 million followers. And if we toggle to the total tab, you can see that 20 trigger city countries make up more than half, or account for more than half, compared to 125 non-trigger city countries. So essentially, trigger city countries are pulling more weight in terms of the amount of followers they're bringing to the table for artists. And it's still, like I said, it's still a sort of not completely uncharted territory, but as it grows more and more, artists are going to pick up on TikTok as a way to use it to promote themselves as artists versus their tracks just going viral. So it'll be important in the future for artists to think about how to engage with certain audiences, where their TikTok audiences are, and how to communicate with them. And one final note here, which is I think is really interesting, is that TikTok was banned in India at the end of June. So the fact that India is still number 3 in terms of TikTok followers is pretty impressive, because that number is essentially a snapshot from the end of June when TikTok was banned. So had TikTok not been banned there, I imagine the follower demographics, or the amount of followers that India represented, would be much higher than it is now, just given the fact that it's just sort of frozen in time at that end of June point. And with that, I will hand it off to Jason again to wrap up with some overall takeaways.
Awesome, thanks, Rhett. Yeah, and so Rhett already mentioned this, but we're a data team, we're a data insights team. We can't say, creatively speaking, how you'd want to use this kind of framework. And over again, we'll just repeat that it's not like a get-rich-quick scheme, or it's not a gaming the system thing. It's just something that we couldn't help but notice when we looked further into the data and looking at kind of where the shifts of kind of attention can possibly be when it comes to an artist's, growing of their own fan base. Mars brought it up in the chat earlier. If you're trying to optimize for something like, higher revenue per stream, this probably doesn't apply as much to you, and it's a very good point to make. But if maybe you're an indie artist and you're maybe, focused on, I don't know, doing pop covers of BTS songs and marketing it through Instagram in the Philippines, that might be a great way to at least build long-term fan base, people who can follow you and look at your future work. So those things are loosely correlated, but obviously if you want to be more kind of pragmatic about kind of what your goals are, this can kind of really depend on how trigger seeds can either play more of a part in your kind of day-to-day and strategic outlook than others. Yeah, but that's it. I think that's it. We're starting to run low on time and just want to leave some room for questions. So if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to try to answer them.
Well, while we're waiting on a couple questions to trickle in, and folks, feel free to use the questions box on your dashboard to submit. I want to thank everyone from the Chartmetric team who presented today for giving these invaluable insights to everybody. It was a great presentation and a lot to come through. So definitely submit anything that you have in the questions box.
Awesome, thanks, Henrik. Ben asked, will you continue to share public data as you analyze the changing trends? We totally can. It's definitely something we want to keep monitoring. As the years go by, I'm sure these dynamics are going to modify to a certain degree. So, we have a blog at blog.chartmetric.com that maybe we can do a refresher on. Feel free to contact us. If you email us at insights@chartmetric.com, we're happy to kind of continue on a conversation that's maybe more nuanced depending on your situation. But yes, it's definitely something that we'd like to kind of touch upon as time goes by. Howie asked, is there a version of this YouTube data that accounts for the population of the city? We don't have one right now, but generally speaking, it correlated with a higher population, would correlate with kind of a deep and more broad kind of consumption pattern. And you could certainly join population data to those charts that you saw earlier. Charles is asking, do you plan on monitoring all the TikTok copycats? Rucker, can you maybe pick that one apart a bit?
In terms of platforms like Triller and Reels, I'm assuming is what the question is asking. It's something that may come down the pipeline in the near future, but at the moment, we're really focused on making our TikTok data as good as it can be before we start, you know, expanding to other platforms that might compete with it.
Yeah, most definitely. Great. I mean, if the trigger series concept is of real interest to you, you know, we have, Rucker, if you can find the links of those articles and maybe put them in the chat for everyone. There are like 3 chapters of it, where we focused on 1, the concept, and then 2, the Latin American cities and some of these interesting patterns that you see there, and then another one on the Southeast Asian cities where we saw kind of interesting patterns there as well. Some examples of that would be in the Southeast Asian one, who was it? There was an electronic producer who did really, really well on YouTube because he had, it was Alan Walker, that's it. Alan Walker had these YouTube videos of his music with English lyrics on it. Now, it's basically a lyric video, but for those of us who have went out to a karaoke bar with our buddies, karaoke is really a way of life in Southeast Asia. And so those did extremely well there. So that's kind of like one of those unique kind of insights there. You know, in the Latin American piece, we talked a lot about different things. Rock, I think we mentioned this already, tends to do really well in Latin America. And, you know, all across the world, like Instagram, for example, tended to be a lot more domestic and local, you know, in terms of like the top artists with the biggest followings on Instagram tended to be very local, whereas opposed to, you know, Spotify tended to lean towards more English language artists, where YouTube was kind of a mixed bag of everything. So there are a lot of kind of insights, not only just for the geography, but also to the platforms involved as well, because sometimes they have certain nuances depending on kind of where you are in the world. Cool. I think that's it. So, you know, just want to say thanks again for everyone for coming, and thanks Henrik and Nicole for having us in Music Biz. We're just hopeful that, you know, this is useful to you. And if you have any questions, by all means, feel free to engage with us on socials at Chartmetric, or email us at insights@chartmetric.com. Thanks again for listening, everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Jason, Michelle, Rucker, Shashank, thank you so much for presenting today, and thank you all for tuning in to this Common Ground webinar, and we look forward to welcoming you to the next one. Everyone have a good rest of your day.